God speaks, not in the thunder many expect, but in the quiet spaces where the heart trembles before truth. There is a moment in every soul's journey when the whispers become warnings, when the gentle nudge becomes a firmer pull, when the knock at the door grows louder because the one inside refuses to open. And though the world is loud with its own desires, though countless voices drown out what is eternal, there still comes a time when the voice that shaped galaxies leans close to the human spirit and says, "Listen. Hear me now, before the road you're walking closes behind you, before the opportunities you ignore pass you by, before the choices that seem small today grow into mountains tomorrow. I speak because I love, and love warns as surely as it comforts, for there are those who live as though time is endless, as though their next breath is promised, as though their stubbornness shapes destiny more strongly than humility ever could. They bury the call beneath distractions, noise, pride, and the belief that they can outrun consequences. But no one outruns their own becoming. Every step forms the ground beneath the next step, and every choice adds weight to the next choice. The warning is not punishment, it is guidance. It is mercy with its sleeves rolled up, trying to pull someone back from the edge before their own momentum carries them too far. When God speaks, the message is rarely complicated. It is simple enough for the young, deep enough for the wise, soft enough for the wounded, and powerful enough to lift those crushed under the heaviness of their own life. But simplicity can be the hardest thing to accept, because it calls for honesty, and many are afraid of what honesty may reveal. The forgiveness they need, the responsibility they've avoided, the healing they have postponed, the truth they pretend not to see. And so they refuse to listen, not because the voice is faint, but because their fear is loud, yet God continues to speak. In the changing seasons, in the small kindness of strangers, in the emptiness that follows every selfish decision, in the opportunities that keep returning until they stop returning. In the tension that grows inside the heart that knows it was meant for more. His warnings are woven inside the ache we cannot explain, the longing that never fully sleeps, the sense that life is bigger than the way we are living it right now. Sometimes the warning arrives as restlessness, sometimes as conviction, sometimes as a sudden clarity that pierces through confusion like a ray of light through storm clouds. And when that clarity comes, it is not the world speaking, it is the soul remembering what it forgot. There is a danger in ignoring such moments. The danger is not that God will abandon the soul, the danger is that the soul may abandon itself. Every time a person refuses to face the truth, they build another wall inside. Every time they silence the inner calling, they numb a piece of their own purpose. And in that numbness grows a life that drifts instead of directs, exists instead of awakens, reacts instead of chooses. A life on autopilot cannot hear the warnings meant to save it. A life too proud to bend cannot feel the hands trying to lift it. Still, the warning continues because love refuses to give up, even when the listener gives nothing in return. Love does not fear rejection, love fears the cost of silence. That is why God speaks again and again, not to accuse but to awaken, not to condemn but to redirect. The warning is a lantern in the dark, not a sword drawn against the wanderer. It is an invitation to turn around, to let go, to start over before too late becomes a phrase soaked with regret. And though some will resist until life itself breaks their resistance, God's voice waits even for them, patient beyond understanding, steady beyond human endurance. There are people who say, "I hear nothing," but the truth is that listening is not a matter of volume, it is a matter of willingness. The whisper becomes a roar only in hindsight. Those who finally understand look back and say, "The signs were everywhere. I just didn't want to acknowledge them." The warning was in the relationships that crumbled after neglect, in the doors that shut because they were approached with arrogance, in the stress that grew from ignoring what the heart begged to confront. The warning lived inside the uncomfortable truths avoided day after day, until avoiding them became more painful than facing them, and yet, the moment someone decides to listen, the entire direction of their life can change. It is astonishing how quickly light rushes into a soul the second it opens a window. The same voice that warned becomes the voice that restores. The same truth that pressed becomes the truth that heals. The same conviction that unsettled becomes the path to freedom. Those who heed the warning discover that God never speaks to shame them but to shape them. And in that shaping, they find the strength they thought they lacked. The hope they stopped believing in, the purpose that once seemed distant but was always within reach. There is a quiet power in surrendering to the voice that sees farther than our fears and deeper than our excuses. Listening is an act of courage, not weakness. It takes courage to admit that change is necessary. Courage to confront habits that have become prisons. Courage to walk away from things that feel comfortable but are killing potential. Courage to rebuild what was broken. Courage to forgive when resentment feels easier. Courage to believe that life can still grow even in the shadows of past mistakes. Those who refuse to listen often mistake stubbornness for strength, but real strength knows when to bow, when to soften, when to receive what it has long resisted. Many refuse to listen because they believe the warning is a threat. But a warning from God is not the voice of a judge seeking to punish, it is the plea of a father watching a child walk toward danger. It is not about wrath, it is about rescue. It is not about fear, it is about freedom. The path a person is on might feel harmless now, but destiny sees farther than the present moment. Choices ripple forward, and the warning is given not because of what is happening today but because of what will unfold tomorrow if nothing changes. There are people who wait for dramatic signs, flames in the sky, miracles on demand, unmistakable thunderous declarations. But God often speaks through gentle means because the soul that is willing to change does not require dramatic intervention. The soil of the heart that is soft receives seeds without storms. But the heart that refuses to listen sometimes demands storms simply because it ignored the whisper. When a lesson refuses to be learned in peace, life may teach it through disruption. Not as punishment, but as preservation, and so the warning continues, whispered into moments that seem ordinary but carry eternal weight. That weary feeling that you cannot continue living the way you have been living, that is a warning born from hope. That quiet conviction that the choices you are making do not align with who you truly are, that is guidance. Not guilt. That unshakable sense that something needs to change but you keep postponing it, that is the voice trying to save your future from the consequences of your present, yet even among those who refuse to listen, there remains a flicker of awareness that never fully dies. It is the part of the soul that knows it was created for something more, the part that recognizes the difference between fulfillment and distraction, the part that still aches for meaning even when buried under layers of denial. That part hears the warning even when the mind rejects it. And one day, when the noise fades and the exhaustion reaches its peak, that flicker becomes the spark that turns a warning into a turning point. Because God does not speak warnings to frighten but to prepare. Every shift in life begins with a message. Sometimes it comes before the shaking, sometimes during it, sometimes after the dust begins to settle. But it always comes with the same promise: you can still choose a better path. You can still rise from the place where you stumbled. You can still rebuild what you lost. You can still heal the wounds you caused or endured. You can still return to the purpose you abandoned. A warning is not an ending, it is the doorway to a new beginning. Even now, countless hearts feel this pull but are afraid to call it what it is. They tell themselves they will listen later, when it is convenient. When they are stronger, when circumstances calm down. But later is the most dangerous word a person can speak to their own destiny. Later has buried more dreams than failure ever did. Later has destroyed more relationships than conflict ever could. Later is the graveyard of intentions. And so the warning grows stronger: do not wait. The longer you delay, the harder the path becomes. The longer you resist, the heavier the burden grows. Every step taken away from truth must eventually be retraced, and the sooner you start, the sooner you are free, yet even this urgency is wrapped in compassion. God never forces, He invites. He does not crush the stubborn, He calls them gently until the moment they realize they cannot continue without the guidance they once ignored. And the moment they turn, even slightly, grace floods in like dawn breaking over a long night. All the warnings that once felt heavy suddenly make sense. They realize they were never meant to terrify but to protect. Never meant to shame but to shape. Never meant to limit but to liberate. And in that realization, a new strength awakens. The burden that once felt unbearable becomes the motivation to move forward. The mistakes that once seemed final become testimony of resilience. The pain that once felt meaningless becomes fuel for compassion. The same soul that once refused to listen becomes the soul that hears not only the warning but the promise behind it: you were created for more than the life your fear has allowed you to live, and yet there comes a moment in every journey when the soul tires of running. A moment when even the strongest stubbornness cracks beneath the weight of its own exhaustion. A moment when pretending becomes heavier than truth, when avoiding becomes more painful than confronting. When silence in the heart becomes louder than any noise outside. For those who have long refused to listen, this moment is not the end. It is the beginning they once feared but secretly longed for. It is the point where the warning turns into a lifeline, and the traveler realizes that the voice calling out to them was never the voice of judgment, but the voice of home. It is a strange and beautiful reality that the very warnings once rejected become the very words that guide a person back to themselves. Sometimes the message needs to echo for years before it finds fertile ground. Sometimes the heart has to wander through seasons of disappointment before it recognizes the value of what it once ignored. But even then, the voice does not mock, does not scold, does not say, "I told you so." It simply says, "You are here now. Let us begin." The transformation does not happen all at once. It begins quietly, like the steady flame of a candle in a dark room. At first the light seems small compared to the darkness that has built up over time, but light has a way of expanding with every step taken toward it. Every act of honesty strengthens it. Every moment of humility brightens it. Every apology, every decision to grow, every attempt to understand rather than defend begins to dissolve the shadows that once made the warning feel threatening. And slowly, the soul realizes that the warning was never meant to bring fear, it was meant to lead them to this light. But even as the soul awakens, there remains the memory of all the times the voice was ignored. This memory becomes a teacher, not a tormentor. It becomes the reminder of how precious clarity is. How dangerous numbness can be. How deeply the soul needs guidance, not because it is weak, but because it was created for connection, direction, and meaning. In the quiet after awakening, a person sees their life not as a chain of failures but as a testimony of what endurance can produce. Those who once refused to listen begin to understand the subtle ways that warnings are woven into life. The missed opportunities were not punishments, they were redirections. The closed doors were not rejection, they were protection. The friendships that faded were not losses, they were transitions. The inner frustration that grew day after day was not an inconvenience, it was the internal alarm meant to save them from living below their purpose. When clarity comes, it gathers all the scattered moments of the past and arranges them into a story that suddenly makes sense, and now, the soul that once resisted begins to desire the very voice it ignored. It starts to listen differently, not out of fear, but out of hunger. Hunger for truth. Hunger for growth. Hunger for meaning that does not disappear when circumstances change. Hunger for direction that aligns with something eternal. And in this hunger, something powerful happens. The warning evolves into wisdom. What once felt like a constraint becomes guidance. What once felt like pressure becomes strength. What once felt like discomfort becomes transformation, because when a person finally listens, truly listens, the warning doesn't remain a warning, it becomes a map. That map does not promise an easy road. In fact, the path forward often requires more courage than the path behind ever asked for. It calls for rebuilding what was neglected, healing what was wounded, changing what was habitual, letting go of what was clung to for too long. But now the soul understands something it could not grasp while resisting. Difficulty is not a sign of abandonment. Difficulty is the doorway to becoming the version of oneself that fear tried so hard to prevent. There are days in this journey when the soul feels fragile, unsure, tempted to return to old patterns. But even then, the voice remains steady. It does not grow impatient, it grows closer. It does not shout, it strengthens. It does not withdraw, it surrounds. The one who once refused to listen is now learning the language of persistence. Every stumble teaches perseverance. Every moment of doubt teaches reliance. And every victory, no matter how small, teaches the soul that listening is not an act of surrendering control, it is an act of stepping into destiny, for it is destiny, not guilt, that calls the traveler forward. The warning always had destiny behind it, purpose behind it, vision behind it, a better future behind it. The soul that finally listens begins to feel this truth rise within them like a tide. They begin to sense that their life was never meant to be defined by resistance, but by response. Not by fear, but by faith. Not by delays, but by decisions that reflect who they truly are, not who they were when they refused to listen, and now the journey shifts. The traveler begins to walk with intention. The steps are still sometimes heavy, but they are no longer aimless. The days still hold challenges, but they no longer feel meaningless. The future still carries uncertainty, but it no longer feels threatening. There is a new strength forming, a strength rooted not in controlling everything, but in trusting the one who sees beyond everything. The warnings still come, but now they come as guidance. They come as insight. They come as protection. They come as the still, small voice that says, "Walk this way." Not because you must, but because this is the way to life. This is the way to peace. This is the way to purpose. And now the soul listens quickly, not grudgingly. It understands what it once rejected. It recognizes the gift inside every moment of correction, but one of the most profound transformations that happens in a person who has learned to listen is how they begin to speak to others. They become compassionate in ways they never could have been before. They recognize the struggle in those who refuse to listen because they remember their own struggle. They understand the fear behind defiance, the pain behind stubbornness, the confusion behind avoidance. And because they understand, they inspire, not by force, but by authenticity. They speak not as someone above others, but as someone who has walked through the same fire and found a way out. They encourage gently, guide patiently, support quietly. Their life becomes a living warning, but not a warning of doom. A warning of what happens when you ignore your purpose and what happens when you embrace it. They carry the message not as a burden but as a torch, lighting the path for those still stumbling in the dark. In this way, the journey comes full circle. The one who once refused to listen becomes the one who helps others listen. The heart that resisted transformation becomes the heart that inspires transformation. The life that was once drifting becomes a lighthouse for lives still searching, and this is the mystery of warnings. They are not meant to crush but to commission. They are not meant to limit but to lift. They are not meant to frighten but to fuel a future that fear prevented. Those who understand this walk differently. They live awake, not asleep. They live intentional, not reactive. They live grateful, not entitled. They live aware of the fragile moments when the voice speaks softly, aware that these gentle whispers often shape the greatest seasons of growth. But even with all this growth, there remains a deeper truth. One that only becomes clear with time. The greatest warning is not about what might happen in the world around you, but what might happen inside you if you ignore the voice that calls you toward your own purpose. The external world can shake, but a listening heart remains steady. The circumstances of life can shift, but a responsive soul remains anchored. The storms can rise, but a person who has learned to hear the divine guidance within them walks with a peace that circumstances cannot steal. For the greatest danger is not the storm outside, it is the silence inside when the voice is ignored. But the greatest blessing is not the calm outside, it is the clarity inside when the voice is welcomed. This clarity becomes a light that grows stronger with every decision made in alignment with truth. It becomes a force that radiates into every corner of life, relationships, purpose, character, emotional strength, spiritual resilience. And the more the person listens, the more they realize that the warning was not about fear, but about preparation. Not about dread, but about direction. Not about judgment, but about joy.